Hello, everyone. I'll give you a second to get connected to sound. Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rails 1199th New Social Environment. I'm Magali, a programs associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Lindsay C. Harris and Theodore Kerr. And now I'll introduce today's guests and hosts. Lindsay C. Harris is the director of Recess, an abolitionist arts organization partnering with artists, youth, writers, and their chosen publics to create transformative cultural experiences. As a Brooklyn-based artist, cultural worker, and educator, Lindsay's practice explores Black and queer identity, anti-racist pedagogy, and institutional change. And our host today, Theodore Kerr, is a writer and organizer. He is a founding member of What Would an HIV Doula Do? He and Alexandra Yuhas have recently released the book, We Are Having This Conversation Now, The Times of AIDS Cultural Production. And with that, I will hand it over to Ted to get us started.
Thanks, Magley. This is such a pleasure. Hi, Lindsay.
Hi, Ted, and thanks, Magley.
I am very excited to be here. And one of the things that we agreed upon in planning this is that we would just dive in. So let's first talk about recess, and then we'll get to know you a bit better, Lindsay. So for the people joining us, on the screen are going to be some images from recess provided by Lindsay and the team, and we'll touch on them, but we're not going to go into detail. So Magley gave us a rundown of what's on the website, what's important to know about recess. But Lindsay, I would love it if you could explain recess to me as if I'm your good friend that you haven't seen since childhood, and you believe I have the capacity to understand recess, but you're not sure we share the same politics. How about that? How's that for a challenge?
First off, I love this question, Ted, so thank you so much. And I think it's a very real question too. It's a very real prompt because I think a lot of the work that we do sometimes can feel very, niche, right? Like what is this art abolitionist space? But in reality, a lot of what we're doing is like connecting people and ideas. And so, like I see this image that's up on the screen, like there's so much joy, there's so much love, there's so much like playfulness. And so whatever the projects that are coming through, whether it's our session projects where artists are taking over like our first floor space for 2 months and thinking about the process of creating versus the product, that can like really, really vary in themes, or whether it's working with our young adults who are also still on the screen in the assembly program, who are constantly just like experimenting and playing, and whether that's music or tattoo, or in this case this was a DJ workshop. Yeah, it just really varies by the day. And so I think recess is a place of joy, of connection, of experimentation, of critical conversations, and accountability and abolition. And so come through.
So let's do what you just beautifully did with recess with the word abolition, because it is a word that is clearly important. It's been uttered twice already. So let's get into it. What do you mean by abolition? And what does recess mean, right? You can answer as an ED or as a human being, because you're both.
Yes, I am both. I think well, I actually appreciate this question, can answer it so many different ways, because I think it's something that we're constantly striving towards. It's not that we have achieved that, right? And that's kind of the approach to abolition, that it's about the dismantling of systems of oppression while simultaneously investing in communities of safety and joy and creativity. And I'm actually at recess right now, and so I like hear a lot of that like joy happening in the other room. And so that's a lot of what we talk about in terms of abolition for us. And so are using the frameworks of folks like Ruth Wilson Gilmore, and I think there's ways in which it's changed it's an away, sorry, there's ways in which we have used it as a frame that then allows us to make decisions internally at the organization with our programming, with the ways we're relating to each other, that's about working towards this liberatory world. So that's my personal definition, and kind of sprung in there a little bit of Recess's definition as well.
I find that such an exciting response, because so often the word abolition is primarily used, if it's used at all, in relationship to prison or punishment or crime or quote unquote bad things. And what I love is that you and Recess and all the artists that come through are thinking about it in terms of what is possible, what is the world we want to build, and how do we keep building it so that joy that you're hearing, that we're feeling from these pictures, can come through. I just kind of quoted you by saying come through. You offered all of us to come to Recess. Now be honest and be clear. What is the best way to get our butts to Recess?
Well, for those who have come here, you know that we're a little far from the train, and we're a little bit far from, yeah, I guess like major ports or major intersections in Brooklyn, but we're near the Navy Yard in Clinton Hill, up Washington Ave. And Recess, you know, in its 15 years, you know, has also changed locations, but we've been here for, I think about 6 or 7 years, somewhere around there. And so, you know, it's constantly evolving and changing, like what's happening in the space. So like this image right here is from the session project that was about a year and a half ago, between King Cobra and Hugh Hallooms. And so you can see that this space was really transformed into this really inviting, warm, kind of womb-like space. Their project was focused on ancestral healing and tattoo work, and you can see there's an altar. This was during the opening ceremony where there was also a sound bath, and so I think depending on what you're coming to, your experience is going to be completely different. So there's both the physical, you know, like come to the space, you know, and come whatever means, you know, feels accessible to you, but also like show up in engaging in, you know, the types of experiences that yeah, that also appeal to you. I mean, it really just depends on each artist's ideas for the ways in which they want to work with what we call their intentional public, you know, the folks that they're wanting to co-create together with. And so, yeah, so that, you know, all of that is possible, I guess, at Recess.
Yeah, what I love about the times that I've made, I would say, the lovely journey to Recess, because it is kind of a very interesting walk. If we're talking about chosen publics, you traverse from the train station or on your bicycle or as you walk many different microclimates of people and geographies and architecture that I really love. And then once I'm in the space, I don't think I've ever stayed less than an hour. There's something very inviting and alluring and connecting to the space. You know, I always think that, oh, I'm just going to dip in, see what's up, and leave. And no, I have a conversation with a friend I didn't know would be there, or I meet somebody new whose liberatory practice kind of knocks my socks off. And so I might have been joking a little bit on how to get there, but it's worth it.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that, Ted, because I think that there's like so much like magic and power in being like having to work for it a little bit, right? The like, yeah, like if you're not necessarily gonna just like, oh, swing by on your way to the 5 million other things that we're often, you know, bouncing around to in New York. It's often a bit of a commitment, you know, for the evening. And so that also means that and it's intimate, you know, it's a very intimate physical space and like the experiences are often very intimate, with, like you said, people that that you're either meeting for the first time or reconnecting with, or, and exchanging ideas in whatever way. And so that feels really, really special. And I think something, I guess, that we lean into also, with our artists,
Yeah.
young folks. Yeah.
I do want to get back to the programming and the space and the magic, but I also want to deliver on the promise we made at the beginning of this call, which is to say we're going to talk about you a bit. So, Lindsay, I know who and where you are right now, but I'm wondering, and push back if this question is too big, but what do you think are some of the experiences that you've had in life that have led you to be the ED of Recess in 2025?
That's a hard question, Ted.
I know. You already have the job, so you can say whatever you want now.
I know. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate it. I guess it got me, there's one thing that I'll just start where the first thing where my mind goes is that, so yeah, I'm mostly have been a multimedia artist, an educator, mostly working with young folks, young adults and teens, mostly queer and trans young folks of color, and have also been a curator and kind of traversed a lot of different, administrative roles. And like many of us have had all kinds of random jobs in my life as well. But I think, one thing that, especially as I've been engaged in more diversion programming, which, for those who aren't aware, it's thinking about, I mean, there's a few different ways in which diversion programs can look, but it's basically like diverting from the criminal legal system. And so could be diverting from court, so doing arts programming instead of appearing in court, or diverting from jail or other forms of incarceration through also art programming. And so Assembly at Recess is our youth young adult program for system impacted young folks ages 18 to 26, or 25. And it's folks, so it's a mix of folks who may have open cases that then can get fulfilled through arts programming, and then other folks who are referred from each other. And it's, based off of a curriculum developed by my former co-director, Sean Leonardo, along with his collaborators around mirror echo tilt curriculum. And so it's like evolved a lot over however 8 years, that it's been at Recess. But I think that being engaged, like that was one of the main reasons I did come to Recess, was because of that program and, my own passion and experience working with young folks to imagine new possibilities for themselves and each other, and to create, spaces of resilience and joy. And I came from museums, previously working at Brooklyn Museum and working at a whole range of other organizations across the city. But my very first art and museum job was in high school in Santa Fe, New Mexico, at as part of a diversion program. And so I didn't, when I worked at the Santa Fe Children's Museum, it was like fulfilling a diversion court mandated volunteer. And it was something, very simple at the time. I wouldn't say that it was hugely impactful, or I never thought about it as hugely impactful in my trajectory until more like the last, 5-10 years of just like that, the little, and part of it was about, the circumstances of the time, but also just the ability to imagine possibilities, as a young person, was something that I'm reflecting a lot on, and both in terms of, being at this children's museum and like handling the snakes and like all of that. But then also, you know, that program was called Teen Court. And so it was like a version of youth development and youth leadership that I also saw and witnessed and was a part of, that, you know, where young, you know, teenagers were collectively determining each other's sentencing, and also they were, you know, trained to basically defend each other, and with support of lawyers and judges. But, you know, that was also something I've reflected on more recently, that I'm like, that version of like mutual accountability and, you know, the determination that was developed by each other was also something that I think has informed, whether I was conscious of it or not, you know, has definitely informed my recognition through a lot of my youth work, that young people are incredible, right? And like, if we're going to imagine new worlds and new ways of doing things, then we've got to listen to artists, we've got to listen to, you know, young folks, we've got to be able to create new systems where we're really building with each other. Ideally completely out and separate from, you know, criminal legal system, but yeah, just imagining and creating these new ways of being. And so that, I don't know, that's what's coming to me right now, Ted, in terms of the answer to that question. Um, is that maybe, you know, and a lot of obviously my own experiences as a mixed Black queer young person, and, you know, opportunities I wanted to have or wish I had, you know, certainly informed it. And then just like meeting and being around and working with other incredible artists who are really using, you know, using the power of art to connect and to change systems and to question systems and to create new spaces of joy and possibility.
That was such a beautiful answer. And I really loved hearing about you at different stages of your life, whether it's as a teenager or as a young person in the present. And I really loved hearing the kind of the breadth of jobs that you've had and the ways in which your jobs seem always to be this like nexus of action, art, and justice. And so it makes perfect sense to me that you are, you know, now steering a ship, facilitating freedom, you know, leading this organization. Do you mind if I share a brief story that connects to diversion?
Please. Oh,
So a few years ago, so I'm a founder of a collective called What Would an HIV Doula Do? And we understand a doula as someone who holds space during times of transition. And for us, HIV is a series of transitions that start long before you get the test and long after you're on medication and even after death. But this definition of a doula came from understanding that there are birth doulas, there are abortion doulas, there are gender doulas, there are end-of-life doulas. And I was on a panel once, and on that panel was a young person who did this really incredible work. They volunteered their time for in the emergency room when someone had come in and they were raped or sexually assaulted. They would be there to hold space with that person to help them decide if and when they wanted to talk to the police about what had happened to them. Did they want to press charges? And they would learn all about what that would mean to not press charges, to press charges, to press charges later. And I, thinking that I was very helpful, said, "Oh, you're a doula." That's what I said to the person on the panel. And the person on the panel fought back right away, said, "No, I don't like that. I'm not a doula. I don't work for the criminal justice system. I don't work for them." And I agreed with this person 100%. And I said, "I think you're a doula for justice. In fact, you're holding space for this person to decide what justice looks like for them. And it might mean they have to invite forces they don't want in, but you're holding space for this seed called justice that gets corrupted by the criminal justice system to go through." And I'm just wondering if this word doula is helpful to you at recess or helpful to you thinking about diversion, this idea of holding space during times of transition?
Yeah, I guess where my mind goes with that is I guess moving away from the, from prison abolition and the criminal legal system and more into the aspects of transition, one that, certainly Recess as an organization has been in for well, forever, actually. And yes, even since it's, like I think I said it's about 15 years old. Was created in 2009. And the by the founder and former executive director and co-director Allison, who was, I think, thinking about like space for artists to experiment and play and to focus on process in a way that wasn't afforded in an art world that was focused so much on process. And so in that sense, that's what kind of comes to mind too, in terms of this idea of like caring during transition. It's like already from its early, founding, to think about like how do you care enough about the process, I guess, is one part of it. And then maybe fast forward, my mind is like bouncing all over the place. So I'm like, because I think there's so much in this, but I think fast forwarding to now, we've been thinking holistically as an organization, me and the rest of the team around how to care for artists, continuing to do that, what are the resources, we have a care and capacity fund, for artists. What are the resources, for our assembly young folks, right? We've got like different buckets of like monetary resources, of like mental health integration and support, for staff as well, like we've been doing a lot of work together, just to name that actually has been hugely transformative, for the ways in which we're thinking about like care in the transition. And honestly, sorry, my mind is like going so many places. I think this is very rich, this question. So
we should have coffee.
Ted, reel me in if you need.
Okay, you're doing good though, because I think part of what Recess does is that it is about what you're experiencing right now. And you said it earlier, it's not about the thing at the end. It's not about the artifact that someone makes. It's about the process along the way. And if there's something to show for it, whatever. So lean into your process, friend.
Yeah. I just think like so much of the slowing down and the focusing on like what is really needed to heal, to connect, to understand, to learn and unlearn and all of that, to experiment. I definitely don't think there's enough of that, in the space, and especially in New York, and in the many of the spaces that we're all in. Things can move very fast that we forget to really care for ourselves and each other in that way. And so even as an organization, as a nonprofit organization, as we strive towards abolition, and we continue to evolve with our artists and our writers and our young folks, there's a lot that I think we're trying to do that's about the slowing down and the process, and like finding more and more things that we're seeing we can do that maybe is not the norm, but we're positioned in a way that we can actually attempt that, and that's like within the confines of nonprofits, which that's, it's a whole nother thing, of course, that, has got its own challenges and restrictions and, all of that. But being able to like breathe and stretch and see what's possible for ourselves within this, and then also, with the partners and communities that we're a part of as well.
Yeah, I mean, so let's get into it. I'm someone who's been around the nonprofit world for a while, and as a staff member, there is a kind of shorthand where the word board kind of can be this kind of like hovering thing that scares you, or it can be the thing that everyone blames for the lack of something, or it can, what I'm trying to say is that often boards are seen as scary or negative or impeding progress or being just about money. And one thing that I think has been, revelatory in learning about Recess is the way that you all have been restructuring how you work as staff, and also what that means to have a board. And I would love it if you can just walk us through this, because I think it's a model that a lot of people on this call would be interested to know about and to think about how can it be true for them too.
Yeah, definitely. So there's a lot that we're doing right now that going back to this idea of like process and all that, like we have been building as an organization, building towards this for some time, right? So I've been at Recess for about a year and a half, almost 2 years. And I think that there was a lot that, Alison Weisberg, the founder, was kind of putting in the steps for, especially leading into like 2018, 2019, with the team there. And then these last like 5 years, and then especially the last 2 years, have really ramped up. And so and that's, yeah. So what we've been doing right now is last year, or yeah, 2023, we launched a process of completely reimagining the board. And that's partially, like, I knew that was coming. That's partially why I came on to Recess, because I was really excited to do that work, because many of us have been a part of boards or have interacted or been on boards, and they can be real toxic. I'll just say that, right? They can be at best, sometimes. And there's an inherent, I think we found that even through experimentations prior to me starting with the previous board and board members, which, did experiment with certain things like a co-chair model, with like bringing in artists and folks who were really more on the ground, more closely impacted by the work that, Recess is doing, and in community, bringing those folks into real leadership and ideation and decision making. That's been happening for a number of years. And also, I think, part of what opened up in that process is that's still limiting. If you're still kind of having a model where some folks maybe are contributing a good amount, others aren't, or there's different stakes or investment in terms of time, non-monetary investment. Like, how do you actually hold the people? How do we, just like we're doing as staff, how do we create spaces where we have structure, where we know how we're going to make decisions? And is that aligned with our values? And so we have this framework called the Care and Accountability Framework Towards Abolition, and that's on our website. And, that was also kind of building a lot, with the board at the time, with the staff at the time, like trying putting into language, like what some of these bigger ideas that the organization is trying to move towards, that for the most part, it was at the staff level. So things like implementing a universal salary, which we still have a two-tiered universal salary. Things like, healthcare for all staff, full-time and part-time. So like certain things like that, and as well as like frameworks for how we were thinking about other operational approaches. And so in 2023, so jumping ahead, now we had the opportunity to then really focus and reimagine the board, using many of those ideas and bringing folks in who are already in community, whether it's, folks, other leaders in the field or former artists and all of that, to be able to ideate around and if we could start from scratch, what would a board that is uplifting Recess's values, what would that look like in its form, trying to separate fundraising from governance. And so, yeah, so we embarked on a process. We worked, over a year with, again, this is also all on the website too, for those who are interested in learning more about that. But we did an open call for new board members, and then last fall we transitioned to this new compensated consensus-based board. And so it's been really lovely to think about a smaller board, a board, closer in connection to the staff, working through kind of a manifesto of ideas of how we're going to make decisions and how we're going to create together in a way that is kind of mirroring also what's happening at the staff level around our, shared power. And obviously this is work in progress. There's challenges along the way. We're figuring it out. We fumble, we make mistakes, that's for sure still happening. I'm learning as we go along, for a lot I'm learning. So but we've got great folks, like a really great team across board. We also have an advisory circle and staff who are all contributing together, built off of much of the ideas and work that these previous folks have really allowed us to do.
Hearing you talk about this, one thing that I think should just be underscored is that Recess is a place that both, when you come into the space or you go onto the website, you are meeting and greeting revelatory art rooted in abolition. And let's be honest, in a city like New York, these places are available to us. There's lots of places that show revelatory art, that support amazing artists. What I want to underscore about Recess is that on the other side of the camera or behind that door that you think is locked is also a process that is rooted in these revelatory ideas and in these liberatory ideas. And it seems to me that in some ways, Recess, and push back if this doesn't feel right, that Recess is almost offering itself up as a model to say, we are trying it. We're trying it through transparency. And well, first, let's stop there. Is that true? Do you feel like Recess is part of your transparency about how to run this organization is about wanting other people to join you in this journey?
Definitely. Absolutely. I think the storytelling aspect has been a big part of Recess's history. It's because there are a lot of folks doing this work, right? Not everybody's talking about it. And that's also a strategy, and I think there's also a larger subset of folks who are who aren't able to do it for whatever reasons, they're unwilling, or they're so entrenched within the systems that exist that make it feel impossible, right? And so the storytelling aspect, I think, allows for possibility. Again, it goes back to like the imagining new ways of being. And so I think that's always been at the core of Recess's approach, is to be able to be as transparent as possible with our thinking and to be with other artists and visionaries and organizations, right, that are also experimenting and trying these to push the bounds of nonprofits, of arts organizations. And so, and I think we've all been a part of many organizations where you hear the like, oh, we can't do that. It's like, well, no, that's actually a choice.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so like being able to be in dialogue around, as an organization publicly, where we are making choices and where it fails and where it, might succeed, or what learnings we have, and being able to kind of have that dialogue with folks, I think is critical too, for us all to kind of learn. And so I think that I do see that that's even before I came on as staff to the organization, that's something I always look to Recess for, is that there was incredible boundary pushing artists and artist projects and programs, right? But also that the organization itself was also moving and shaping as an artist-led, kind of experimental process as well. And that,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, especially now, I feel like that feels so necessary for us to think about the liberatory, worlds. Is like, how can we continue to experiment, and bridge these different sectors too, between like art and justice and like community-based work and nonprofits, and just find the intersection, mutual aid, all that.
Yeah, one thing that I'm struggling with in my daily life, and something that I think maybe people on this call and maybe yourself might also be thinking about too, is like, Lindsay, you are at a really amazing organization doing really wonderful liberatory things rooted in freedom and expression. And I'm wondering, how do you deal with the dissonance of what is coming through on our phones and newspapers and radio shows, all the rising level of fascism, with the worlds that you are building and a part of? How are you dealing with that? I'm saying dissonance, but call it what you want.
I would great question. Every day is different. I think I think how I'll answer that is that I feel grateful for, my colleagues. I work with incredible people who are also kind of, balancing, right? We're all in it together, kind of balancing the personal and the organizational, and being able to kind of think creatively together, about, and also my colleagues like across institutions. That's been huge, is being able to connect with folks who are all in the same position. Like, we're all trying to figure out how do we kind of reconcile these things happening, and we don't, every single day there's something else that's another attack, on the arts, on arts funding, on us as people of color, as Black folks, as queer folks, as disabled folks, as like immigrant folks. Like, the realities are all around. And I think the part that feels grounding is that we are in the work of like the deep work of understanding what are our values and who are we. And so the kind of understanding of that and like holding on to that means that we're able to pivot no matter what strategy is going to be needed. And
Wait,
so
say
if
more.
that's
This is a good time to slow down. I think it's really important what you're saying, that a deep understanding of your values means that you're able to pivot. Can you spell that out for us? This is my most Oprah impersonation, by the way. Spell out for us.
yeah, I mean like we had already done as part of like the board work, that I was mentioning, and our, great, as we continue to dig into like what abolition, like what striving towards abolition means for us, and then like our relationships then with other institutions because of that, whether that's the NYPD or the DA's office or otherwise, as we continue to ask ourselves these questions and really grapple with them. Um, and also we had already been working towards divestment work and understanding of like that we have power as an institution to make active decisions in all aspects of our organization, even if even if we're not able to make decisions that we want, we're still conscious of that, based on our values. And so I think that piece, while it's still like okay, what's going on here? There's still like kind of a panic. I'm not gonna lie and say like, yeah, my nervous system is settled all the time. Like no, it's not. But I think that there's like that grounding in our values that we can return to then find like the beacon, and be able to support each other in community around that, because it's so easy to to not quite know how to move and where to move, especially when there's so much uncertainty, and the decisions that we all have to make for ourselves change, now daily. But I think that being able to have a community of folks where we all understand the shared values, and that's not like something work that we're doing to begin, or we're not just starting that work, we've already been deeply in that work, then means that like we're supporting each other through that like pivoting and decision making, that's grounded on like, this is who we are. Recess is, at this point we are a Black led, like POC, predominantly POC organization. We're in Brooklyn. We center our artists and experimentation and process, like all of pushing boundaries, pushing narratives, all of those things that have been a part of, the evolution of recess and where we're at now, thinking about consensus and power sharing. So there's no going back, for us in that sense. And so that feels really comforting to me personally. Yeah.
Thank you for that. It actually did touch my nervous system there, because what I think I heard you say is that the more deeply rooted an organization is, the less it's going to be damaged by the winds that they know are coming. And it doesn't mean that you'll always get to do what you want, how you want to do it, but you will survive and thrive because you are deeply grounded.
Yeah.
And that comes from process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's like, this is the time where we've got to experiment more and create new things. And, like this is just that reminder. So, yeah.
I think that's really powerful. And I think that's a good invitation for us to think about the programming and the outward facing work that you all do. We've talked a little bit about sessions. The two things I really want to touch on is assembly and the critical writing program. I wonder, where do you want to start with those two?
Yeah, well, assembly, I think I talked also a good amount. And this, I don't know how long we'll be on this slide, but this is an image from the project was called Electronic Cafe for Poetic Computation, and the artists were the School for Poetic Computation, and they created this internet cafe, looking at yeah, there was like classes. There was I think this was actually the first project when I started too, so it was really great to see so much engagement. But they're thinking about like connectivity through internet and technology, kind of also through an abolitionist lens. And in this image, you see this is during one of the classes and the kind of playing of games. I'm not sure which program this was specifically, but pictured are some of our former Assembly fellows, so leaders within the Assembly Young Adult Diversion Program, along with the SFPC artists, and so that kind of shows why I wanted to talk about this image too. Is like it shows like just a little bit of like how these things are not completely separate, right? They're Assembly young folks are participants of session programming. They are, depending on the project, they might actually be co-creators with the artist. So that's the case right now with Cleo Reed, who is currently on view downstairs, and their project is called Cunt Tree. Always the horse, never the jockey. I think is what it's called. And so thinking about labor through this lens of like labor and production, and kind of disrupting that through the lens of music and Black music in particular. And so it's co-created with some Assembly fellows. And so the opportunities to kind of collaborate are things that we're trying to lean more into. Critical writing is a program in which writers are commissioned to write about the session projects. That has also varied a lot over the 15 years of recess. But it's another way that we're continuing to engage writing as an art form, and supporting emerging or mid-career, or wherever they're at in their journey, writers to produce a piece, but then also thinking about the exchange between the writer, the artist, and whatever the project might be, because they really vary in form, and yeah, can really range from more experimental to more essay to more critical piece. So that's, and like art historical piece. So that also is the way in which we kind of think too about that. About writing in our work. And then I know I'm like kind of bouncing around between them, so I hope everyone is following. But I think part of why I'm doing that is because, yes, they are distinct, separate programs: session, assembly, and critical writing. However, a lot of what happens organically is the collaboration, and then a lot of what we've been trying to do more intentionally is thinking about these really built out, crossover moments where folks are really learning and engaging with each other, because we believe there's a lot of power and possibility in that, and a lot of learning and mentorship that can come out of that for them and for staff and everybody kind of in our community.
So we have 8 minutes to keep talking. And so that means that folks who are on the call with us should be thinking of their questions. And there's instructions in the chat that Chloe's been giving folks. Lindsay, what you just said was really important to me, this kind of like intersectional approach to the different programs that Recess has. I mentioned at the top of our time together that I've had a chance to come to Recess a few times, and that means I've got to witness or work with amazing artists like Zachary Fabry or Demian Diancy, see the work of Jeffrey Gibson, and it's kind of amazing, Camilo Godoy, right? Just to name a few. It's kind of amazing when you look at the artists that Recess has worked with. It's like a pantheon of socially minded, thoughtful, provocative, recognized artists. And I would love it if we could kind of maybe start to think about, what does archive, all of us, the bulk of this call has been thinking about how do we stay in the moment? How do we think about the future? But I think it would be good for us to think about, how do we respect what has happened before? And what is the role of archive when it comes to the work that Recess does?
Yeah. Um, well, it's interesting too that, yeah, you asked that question because we've, only recently completely redone our website. And this new website allows for more accessibility of the archive of all of the projects. And we're even continuing, there's still some backlog of projects that we're still continuing to add to the website to make sure that they do kind of have presence in this digital archive in this way. But I guess I think too, Prerna Reddy, who runs our session program, and I have been having conversations, after every artist session artist project, we'll do a debrief, and there just the last year, last 2 years during an experimental phase of session, we had the opportunity to bring alums back to into community with Recess and into a session project. And so we had, King Cobra, one of the projects I was talking about, was one of those artists, that came back. A.K. Burns was another artist who came back. And so there's something that, really opens up with very concretely related to that question of archive, when being able to kind of ask artists about their own reflections, having, like in AK's case, they were really early on in the very days before any of us, who are currently on staff. And so being able to reflect on okay, these maybe two distinct moments in your personal career, artistic career, professional career, engaging with the same organization, around, maybe it's some of the same ideas around the project, maybe it's a completely different idea. But, what does that allow? And being able to kind of have the multi-layers of reflections there, just brought up so many, really rich conversations. And then I've certainly been thinking about archive being kind of newly coming into the organization, and trying to learn as much as I can about what has happened, before, because it's very different, as we all know, right? It's always different on the outside than on the inside. And then because it's been so iterative based on, the people, not just the staff, but also, each artist's project, each young person, each collaboration, each partner. So that has also been a really generative process, just learning the ways in which we've, as an organization, evolved and grown to this point, and are able to kind of see those reflections, even just in something as simple as our website, and having that really visible.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I just also want to reflect back to you. There's a real attention to care that comes through, at least in this conversation and what I know of Recess. And I think it's important to note that it's care for the youth that come into the space. And, on some level, that is obvious. If you are a youth welcoming organization and you've been vetted this far, please treat youth well. And I've seen it in action. And the other thing I hear is that you also treat artists well. This idea that AK had a chance to revisit, that's not always a chance artists get. So often artists have to just be thinking like they're an arrow moving forward, and you're only as good as the last line on your CV. And so to provide artists with an opportunity to use the archive for themselves or for other projects is really generous. And then I think you're also speaking about the ways in which you value writing and writers, and that there's care there, that that writing is not just a way to capture, but it's also a process as well. And I wonder, maybe in the last 2 minutes before we throw open the gates of questions, I wonder if you want to just give us a quick thought on what, as the ED of Recess, what does care mean to you?
It's it's such a simple question, but there's so much in that, and I feel grateful that I've actually been thinking about care in so many new ways because of being at Recess. Right? Care can look like just, checking in with folks, right? It can look like, smiling or saying hi, when someone comes in, right? Like simple acts like that, or feeding folks, right? It can look like that. And as a leader, it can look like really, creating structures and systems that are based off of what folks are saying they need, and not based off of the repressive systems of power and power hoarding, or of whatever it is that a lot of us have come through. And so, oh, that's my team. So perfect photo to end this on. But yeah, care looks like coming together and spending time and joy, and really getting to know each other as people. I think I've learned that the work of the transformation, it's about people. It's like that's what we're here doing. And so trying to really be in community and really understand what that means on a deep level. And the deeper you go, the more things get unpacked. Like that's kind of what I see as care, is being open to that process.
Beautiful. Thank you. Magli is joining us now. Thank you, Lindsay.
Thank you both so much. That was such a wonderful discussion. To audience members, if you have a question, there is a link in the chat where you can submit your question. I will ask the first question. Lindsay, I was wondering what you're looking forward to for the future of Recess, or like what your I guess like what you're dreaming for, like actualized in Recess, if that made sense.
Well, right now, it's hard to see too far into the future. And I know that's partially my job, is to, is to like imagine and project, whether like, projecting organizational strategy, budgeting, like all that stuff. But also I'm looking forward to this summer. And like right now, I'm just really taking things day by day. I think that's a lot of where we're at, where it's like literally 2025 has already felt like a whole decade. And so I'm really looking forward to, like the summer is the most active time at Recess. It's when we have the most amount of young people in the building physically, the most amount of our assembly young folks. So there's like things happening all over the building. They're creating music, there's open mics, there's, all kinds of things there. And then we've got some really, interesting projects that are coming up as well, that are going to just have us moving and thinking, differently. And so, yeah, so that I'm kind of looking at this point, I'm like looking forward to when it's warm and when we're, like just like being in community with each other physically in this space and creating. And then I think there's just, there's some visioning stuff that we're digging into with the board, continuing to revise our programming, and just really think about these questions that, Ted and I've been talking about. It's like, how do you operationalize, these things, operationalize abolition? How do you create structures of care? How do you actually do that? And so we're continuing to imagine that together and like bring people into that process right now. Like we're in big ideation phase. So, we'll continue to see what that manifests, Yeah, I think that's my answer.
Thank you for that answer. The next question is from Chloe.
Thank you so much, Lindsay and Ted, for this conversation, which has been such a pleasure to listen to. We're such fans of Recess at the Rail, Lindsay, and just it's been really, really special to hear more about your work from you directly. I am curious about the name Recess. I've always been curious about it, and I wonder both why you picked the name Recess originally and how, or maybe if it's evolved, and how you think about the name Recess specifically.
Yeah, it's a great question. So the way in which I guess I will kind of answer all of them in the same moment, which I think is about, I see recess as, it's the playtime, it's the opportunity to go outside, scrape your knees, it's a break during the school day or at the end of the school day, right? So it's like being able to have that, literally, like the bell goes off and you're like running out and you have your whatever 10 minutes to like get all the energy and climb the jungle gym and like meet your friends and play basketball and do all these things and then run back into the classroom. So it's like that. That is, I think, the origins of the name Recess, as I've understood it from Allison, and then through the many people who reinterpreted it since then. And I think that's still like how we see it. Maybe the parts that I would say that are added onto it is the care aspect that we're talking about. So it's because what I just described sounds to me right now, not as a young child, that sounds stressful. Like I'm like, I gotta get my rest in this tiny little period of time. And so like really thinking about like, okay, how do we focus in on that time? If we're talking about that, recess is the time throughout the day where you play, you experiment, you have free choice, right? You have agency and you have rest, from work or study or whatever it is. Like, what does that kind of mean? As an organization that we are called Recess? And so that's my kind of, interpretation of it.
I just think of every kid who's like, my favorite thing at school is recess, It's like
Can I jump in? And I love what you all are saying about recess. And one thing, I had the beautiful session with Zachary Fabry and the artist Samantha Box at recess. And it was one of those sessions where we just, jammed with our hearts and minds for about an hour. And I walked away thinking, oh, like the recesses of my mind, like the place is an invitation to go deeper and to find that common space where we don't get to, if we're on the surface, we don't always get to tap into the universal. And so that's also what I think about with recess.
That's amazing, Ted. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's incredible. Yeah, I think too, like what you just shared is like, what does playtime look like as adults and art nerds and artists, and and it's like being able to be deep in the ideas of things, as well as being able to, do yoga or make mud bricks or, do, whatever, the tangible things are, play music, record podcasts. Yeah.
Yeah, and to take pause from the structure of things and the relentlessness, right? Like, I think that's such a beautiful word because it's so multifaceted. So thank you so, so much for those thoughts. That was great. Back over to you, Maglie.
Thank you, Chloe, for that question. That concludes our Q&A. I know y'all wanted to close off with a reading and a quote. So I will give you, Lindsay, a chance to introduce the reading, and then Ted, you can go ahead.
Okay. So I'm thinking, well, yeah, thank you. First off, thank you so much, Ted, for this conversation and all of your really thoughtful questions. Like yeah, it was just so great to be in conversation with you as someone who I know thinks a lot about care in your work. And so, yeah, just really appreciate that. Um, and yeah, and thank you, Magley and Chloe. Like this has been incredible to just be a part of this series and Brooklyn Rail. And we're big fans of y'all too. So that's my little spiel there. And then so I think I'm gonna do, we've got a little time, so I'm gonna do this is a slight switch up. I'm gonna do a very short poem first. I'm gonna do two. Is that okay? Okay. So the first is a poem by Nikki Giovanni. May she rest in power. And so it's definitely, yeah, today feeling like wanted to bring Nikki into this space. So this is called Art Sanctuary. I would always choose to be the person running rather than the mob chasing. I would prefer to be the person laughed at rather than the teenagers laughing. I always admired the men and women who sat down for their rights and held in disdain the men and women who spat on them. Everyone deserves sanctuary, a place to go where you are safe. Art offers sanctuary to everyone willing to open their hearts as well as their eyes. Thank you, Nikki. Okay, and then the next one, yeah, let me throw my heart up there too. So the next one feels relevant, to our conversation. And this is an excerpt from Mariam Kaba's essay, The Journey Continues. So definitely, another person that, we've been looking to, and for me, certainly looking to as I'm kind of also like, yeah, I guess, as we think about as an organization, how we move towards abolition. So, all right. None of us has all of the answers, or we would have ended oppression already. But if we keep building the world we want, trying new things and learning from our mistakes, new possibilities emerge. Here's how to begin. First, when we set about trying to transform society, we must remember that ourselves will also need to transform. Our imagination of what a different world can be is limited. We are deeply entangled in the very systems we are organizing to change. White supremacy, misogyny, ableism, classism, homophobia, and transphobia exist everywhere. We have all so thoroughly internalized these logics of oppression that if oppression were to end tomorrow, we would be likely to reproduce previous structures. Being intentional in relation to one another as part of a collective helps to not only imagine new worlds, but also to imagine ourselves differently. Join some of the many organizations, faith groups, and ad hoc collectives that are working to learn and unlearn. For example, what it feels like to actually be safe, or those that are naming and challenging white supremacy and racial capitalism. Second, we must imagine and experiment with new collective structures that enable us to take more principled action, such as embracing collective responsibility to resolve conflicts. We can learn lessons from revolutionary moments like Brazil's landless rural workers movement that have noted that when we create social structures that are less hierarchical and more transparent, we reduce violence and harms. Third, we must simultaneously engage in strategies that reduce contact between people and the criminal legal system. Abolitionists regularly engage in organizing campaigns and mutual aid efforts that move us closer to our goals. We must remember that the goal is not to create a gentler prison and policing system, because as I have noted, a gentler prison and policing system cannot adequately address harm. Instead, we want to divest from these systems as we create the world in which we want to live. Fourth, as scholar and activist Ruth Wilson Gilmore notes, building a different world requires that we not only change how we address harm, but that we change everything. The prison industrial complex is linked in its logics and operation with all other systems, from how students are pushed out of schools when they don't perform as expected, to how people with disabilities are excluded from our communities, to the ways in which workers are treated as expendable in our capitalist system. Changing everything might sound daunting, but it also means there are many places to start, infinite possibilities to collaborate, and endless imaginative interventions and experiments to create. Let's begin our abolitionist journey, not with the question, what do we have now and how can we make it better? Instead, let's ask, what can we imagine for ourselves and the world? If we do that, then boundless possibilities of a more just world await us.
Thank you for those pieces. I'm going to follow up with a short quote from historian of science Stephen Jay Gould. In 1980, he wrote, "I am somehow less interested in the weight and convolutions of Einstein's brain than in the near certainty that people of equal talent have lived and died in cotton fields and sweatshops." And I chose this quote today because I think that Recess is a place that's interested in nurturing this idea of equal talent of the many, working within community to ensure that artists and young people and writers understand themselves as having something to offer and that they don't go unnoticed. So I really thank you, of course, Chloe and Magli and the whole Brooklyn Rail team. And I thank you, Lindsay, and everyone at Recess. It is hard to find sustainable hope today, but this call will fuel me for at least the rest of the day, and Recess alone will fuel me for at least the rest of the month.
Yes, thank you so much, Ted. And yeah, thank you for this conversation. And come through to Recess.
Thank you so much, Lindsay and Ted. This was such a luminous conversation. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art for sponsoring an NSE program and making these daily conversations possible. And for their support of our growing archive, which you can view on the Rail's YouTube channel. The Rail has been free and independent for 24 years. A donation directly supports our writers, staff, and operations. Support our work through the link in the chat. And if you're free, join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a conversation with Veronica Ryan and Maria Elena Ortiz on the occasion of Veronica Ryan Unruly Objects on view at Pulitzer Arts Foundation. And as Israel tradition, you can now all unmute and say hello and goodbyes. Thank you all so much again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you
for such
so
a
much.
great
Thank you,
conversation.
Lindsay and
Thank you
Ted.
so much, Lindsay.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you,
Theodore.
Recess.
Such a great combo.
Thank you.
Bye.